It's the county conversation, and this week we have a special episode for you as we're delving into cricket's transfer market. Cricket's transfer market, what is it exactly? We don't really know either, and that's why we've got someone called Rich Hudson, who's the main man across all of these details in to explain it. I'm your host, Cameron Ponsonby. I'm joined as ever by my favourite of all the Nick Friend, and Rich Hudson, who officially is the head of cricket operations at the PCA, but unofficially is basically the go-to guy for any kind of behind-the-scenes questions dealing with. There's a wonderful page on a website which basically says, for any inquiries, any questions, email rich.hudson@pca.co.uk. And I think that incorporates all requests beyond cricket to begin with, basically. Anyway, I think that was actually quite good. I thought maybe it was convoluted. Rich, thank you for joining us. Nick, thank you for joining us.
And crucially, we've got the right Rich Hudson.
We do have the right Rich Hudson. There's two. There's one who's also
two
very well
working in cricket at the same time on the same
who is
border.
the head of Bucks cricket, and next week we're doing a Buckinghamshire special, and it will be all well and ready to go.
Should have got them both on together.
That would have been great. As a Bucks resident, I would have been a big fan of that.
What is it? How does it work? And does it work? Those are the three questions we're going to tackle this week because we've had a big week of cricket transfers. Emilio Gay's been on the move. Will Rhodes has been on the move. Matt Fisher's been on the move. So, Rich, first things first, we all know what the football transfer market looks like. So, on a very basic level, what is the cricket transfer market? Is there a cricket transfer market?
Yeah, Cameron, look, there is in the most basic sense, but it's not anything. I think it's not like the football transfer market, and I don't think anyone in cricket or any cricket fans out there probably think it is. But we don't have. I think there's often a view of a transfer window. There's no such thing as a transfer window in cricket, frankly. What we have is much more akin to for anyone who is a football fan, of the old sort of Bosman ruling, the idea that players can move in football at the end of their contracts. 95% of player moves, I would say, are the equivalent of a Bosman. A player coming to the end of their contract with their county and deciding that they want to seek employment elsewhere. That's fundamentally what happens. And they can do that from 1st of June in their last year of their contract. They can start talking to other people, start negotiating contracts and seeking to move from the 1st of November. There are some scenarios where you've got players who are middle of contract and move for various circumstances. And that's probably the closest thing to a transfer window or a traditional kind of football transfer, I would say.
So we mentioned the reason we're doing this week is because it's been such a busy week for transfers, but it's been a relatively kind of quiet summer. Like, why is that? What are the driving factors of kind of cricket's transfer market? Because unlike football, where Harry Kane, for instance, did move to Bayern Munich, kind of the equivalent move last year would have been probably Dan Lawrence as kind of an England player going from Essex to Surrey. He's not going to sign for like Fenerbahce. He can only move within the 18 counties that he has on offer to him. Like, what are the driving forces? How does it work in terms of like, is it just an effect, a massive chain, or will there be a case where like you will be having like big moves and someone's hunting after a left arm spinner?
The biggest factor that affects whether it is going to be coming down to just where players are at in their contract cycles. So we seem to be in a year where there are not many players out of contract so there are not many players in the last year of their contract and seeking employment elsewhere. So, I mean, I've had conversations with a couple of agents this week and I've been asking, like, is it as quiet as I feel it is this year? And everyone does seem to be saying that it does seem to be just a year that is a bit quieter. I think there are probably a couple of factors for that. There is definitely a reality to the cost of living thing, sort of challenges that we've all been feeling is definitely putting a squeeze on some counties' finances. So there's probably a limited sort of budget available for counties to really go and seek to recruit. I think the uncertainty is, in terms of investment into the 100 has probably caused everyone to maybe just take a slightly cautious view. Maybe, okay, well, let's just take another year. Let's roll contracts on a little bit more and see what happens.
Why would that have an impact if the counties? Why would the potential 100 investment stop a county being like potentially wanting to invest in a player just because they don't know how much money they've got coming in?
I think there's probably a sense of we don't know what's coming. We don't know what investment we might be getting in from the 100. what that might allow us to do now. So would you potentially, if you've got a decision as to extending a player's contract for a year or so, or investing in potentially a big signing, you might err on the side of caution if you think you're suddenly going to get an injection of money into your county. You might decide to just take the cautious. Let's just pause for a minute. If you're a county that's going after Matt Fisher, you're probably going to go and try and sign Matt Fisher anyway, because you're probably thinking a player of his potential and quality isn't going to come around too much. But if it's more of a bit more of a line call signing, I think you might just take a slightly more safety first view and just see what happens next year. It's probably only one factor of 4 or 5 colliding at the same time, though, I'd say.
I guess one of the interesting things that, I've written a bit about this last year, and a number that I found really stark at the time, and then sort of made a bit more sense the more I looked at it, was I think it's sort of like 420 players have left the game in the last decade, which seems like so many players. But then you look at it and you go 18 counties, 10 years, probably 2.5, 3 players a year being released, not being picked up again. Like, I don't know, one of the interesting things with the way it works, and I guess the big difference in football is that you've got 18 teams across 2 divisions. You don't have an entire professional system in the UK and an entire world where you can go. Like, it's all right. So in a year like this, where it is quieter, we've got counties less sure of themselves. Like, what does, like, almost from like a PCA perspective, like how do you talk to those players? Like, obviously you've been an agent in a previous life as well. Like, how do you talk to those players who might be out of contract, but I guess when you've got 18 teams who will have specific needs, and they might not need, no one might need an off spinner, for example, at the end of the season. How do you manage that? I don't know. How does the game manage that? Like, I don't know. You might lose players for another year, might not have been lost, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, you do. I think firstly, there's definitely some difficult conversations going on with a few players at the moment who ordinarily would have futures sorted by now, and are finding that because the market's quiet, because there's not that much need, that there's probably a little bit more concerned than in other seasons they might be as to whether they're going to secure a contract for next year. You definitely will find that a player could drop out of the system that ordinarily might be good enough, and that's the reality. And to a point, you're trying to work through and support players through the realities of professional sport, that it is this slightly more harsh, cutthroat environment where different factors can affect your situation. You would hope that if a player is good enough, that off spinner is good enough, that he's going to then go back into a trialing system, and hopefully through the early part of the following season or over the winter, enough opportunities evolve that he'll get seen again and come back round. But there are definitely going to be examples. I'm sure every county cricket fan will be able to think of the player that they thought was good enough and dropped out at the wrong time. Part of what we do with players is clearly supporting them, and it's less my role. It's definitely sort of our professional development managers are supporting players with their career transition. So they're trying to prep them for if it does happen, and they're trying to support them when it happens to ensure that jolt and that surprise, if it does come, isn't such a big thing. And that's part of the role of the PCA, is to support players on a much broader scale than just the area that falls under my sort of responsibility on a day-to-day basis. But you can definitely find players drop out, and it's hard, and it can be really hard on a player, and it can be unfair in some ways. In the same breath, is that professional sport as well? Perhaps.
100%.
Question I had was, we mentioned how most of these transfers look like the Bosman transfers, where basically someone comes to the end of their contracts and it goes from there. I'm not going to name the player, because even though they said it in a press conference, I don't know if it was reported on, but player signed like a 3-year deal, and they're like, cool, like, you've committed 3 years to this club, like that's quite a commitment, blah, given your age. And they went, oh, it doesn't mean I have to stay for 3 years. Like, what does it look like if someone wants to leave a contract early, and it is more of a traditional kind of football transfer market deal? How does that happen? Is it just a case of like a club DMing the player and being like, come and have a go, come and join the boys?
But I guess by the same token, like from a player's perspective, what are the reasons? I guess it's probably more one for like your agent had, but like, is that like what reasons will a player give a year out, 2 years out for wanting that move as well? In
terms of that part of the question, in terms of what reasons would they give, they would use, often it can be down to relationship breakdowns. I just can't. I'm just struggling with the coach.
Sure.
We're not getting on. We're really clashing. We're just I don't feel I'm getting any better. There can be a lot of that kind of stuff. I would say probably that would account for 75, 80% of them in contract moves. Just a sense that the player's genuinely unhappy. Similarly, it might be someone who's relocated away from home and actually has found that relocation has been a lot more difficult. They might have family in a different part of the country and there's need. There's usually a pretty collaborative attitude to that kind of conversation. If the county can really see that there's genuine reason behind why the player might want to leave, then they usually, there's generally an approach of kind of, okay, let's look at doing the right thing. And often those situations can work themselves out and the player can find a move. Cameron, to your question of, is it just a DM in the inbox? There's definitely, I probably shouldn't say, but there definitely is some taps on the shoulder.
Perfect.
That goes
Expect
on.
Nothing less.
But I think that it's nothing. That's probably a little bit of the cricket world itself, frankly. But as a general rule, I think that when those kind of situations happen, they tend to land. Counties find out, right? So they tend to then be the ones that actually can be a bit acrimonious. They can be the ones when there's then behind the scenes there really is tension. Well, actually, you might want to leave, but we don't want to let you leave. And if we're going to let you leave, well, there might need to be compensation paid, and then that can become tricky because the discussions over compensation is effectively a transfer fee in football terms. Well, what's a fair figure? How do you come to a fair figure? What precedents have there been around fair figures? All of that then starts to come into the equation in discussions. But yeah, the tap on the shoulder or the DM, just come here and the player gets their head turned, tend to cause a fair few challenges. Actually, they do become quite difficult situations for agents, and when we get involved in them, for us to help navigate.
I interviewed Richie Gleeson, I think at the start of the Blast, and I asked him how his IPL gig came around, and I was fascinated by this because county cricket is one thing, IPL is enormous business, and he said he laughed and said, I think we've been talking about his time at Blackpool Cricket Club, essentially pre-professional days.
Pre-IPL.
Yeah, no, and he literally said, like, it's funny you should say that, because Daryl Mitchell was our overseas player at Blackpool, and he was at CSK, and he texted me and said, are you fit? Are you available? Do you want to come and play for CSK? And obviously he was like, yeah. And he was like, an hour later, Stephen Fleming's texted him. And I'm in fact, like, I know, like, the replacement wheel in the franchise circuit is, often chaotic, but like, it kind of blew my mind that that's a thing as high up as IPL cricket, where like there is I guess replacement gigs help if you know people and you're recommending people and stuff like that. But I don't know. I love that kind of like Friday night club dropout exists on. Hey mate, you about tomorrow? Like,
Yeah.
You can bat 4. I'll buy you a drink afterwards.
There is a bit of, look, it does, as crazy as it seems sometimes, that kind of very much like, I know someone from a long time ago, I'll just drop him a message. And look, we all know when it's coming to IPL, there's clearly a fair bit behind the decision that got them to that point. They were clearly on their work, and they clearly knew Gleeson was the bloke they wanted. And I'm sure Daryl Mitchell sat around the table probably going, well, I'll just message him now. They were probably sat around the table having a beer. Let's just see if he's actually fit and free. I know him, I'll do it. But it's a really nice story actually to hear that that's kind of how it comes about from such a sort of a relationship from so far back. So it's not unusual, and particularly overseas players in county cricket. That's not unusual that there's a bit of that kind of a relationship, particularly actually from overseas franchise competitions. I've got to go. I've got to know so and so. He's a great bloke. He can really play. Let's see if we can bring him in, and actually director of cricket or head coach goes, actually that could be a really interesting fit. That does happen, and it definitely happened.
Top of my head, there've been a couple this year, haven't there? And Sam Billings has done a great job for Kent over the years. I think Xavier Bartlett came via Brisbane Heat. I think Venkatesh Iyer's the statement around Venkatesh Iyer a couple of weeks ago was literally that Phil Salt he came highly recommended by Phil Salt from KKR. Well, you probably don't need the recommendation of someone if he's played 10 white ball games for India, but perhaps. But you're right though. But there is that. But there is that. Yeah.
But when you come to actually putting together, trying to sign a player, or you're looking as a DIC at doing it, and you do want to know what they're like. You do want to know their personality, how they're going to fit in. So the thing that Salt probably came back with was the type of person he was. Was he going to fit in? Was he going to be good around the changing room? Was he going to be a positive influence? So whilst there is the sort of, well, how much do you need to know? But actually that bit behind the scenes of that personal bit probably plays more of a role actually than, again, some people might think in terms of that decision making. These guys clearly spend so much time together week in, week out in the season. The kind of personality stuff is definitely a factor. When we talk to players, to PCA members about it a lot, and I chatted to a player about it this morning, about the kind of impression you give, what characteristics are you showing off when you're talking to a coach or a director of cricket who might be looking at recruiting you. You want to put your best foot forward. You want them to know all those positive bits, just not about how you play, how you strike it, how you bowl, whatever it might be. So that bit plays a big part, I think, in player recruitment and transfers happening.
To move back to like your kind of with your agent hat on, your former agent hat on, what does a transfer actually look like? How does it work? What is the process for you in that role? Like, what is what are the details?
I love that you're sticking with transfer.
It's
not a transfer window. It's not a transfer market.
It's not a transfer window, but it's a transfer of a player. So it has to have a word, and that's the one.
It's a deal. It's a deal. Isn't it?
It's a deal. What does a deal look like, please, Rich?
So it would, if I think back on the ones that I was involved in, it would, in April, it used to be trying to ascertain who was looking for what type of player. First things first, you had to work out what the chances were of the players that you had in your stable at the time of moving. You would know as an agent that I've got a player who lots of people are going to be after, and I've got a player who I might have to really fight hard for to find some more employment. So in April, you're usually trying to get a picture of the market as to who was interested in who. The ones that everyone's interested in, your phone usually rang. They usually would pick up the phone, and you would often get the phone calls of, can we speak to player X, and when can we talk to him? Is he interested in moving? So that would often happen. So you'd spend April trying to find out most of the information. Again, this is slightly under the old way it used to work, and April was that sort of information time. But the principles remain the same. So your information gathering. You then, come the early part of May, you're in a position where you'd have reached a point you could actually then start to have practical conversations, because there are restrictions in players' contracts about when they can talk to other people. But early part of May, you would then start to facilitate conversations. So you'd be talking to your player and say, okay, I've got 5 or 6 teams interested. Let's look at what your priorities are. What is it you're after? And vast majority of the time, whatever anyone might think, I'd say 95% of the time, it's cricket conversations first. Yes, finances comes into it, and yes,
I really wanted you to say cash there. I was really excited. To be like, they just want as much money as possible.
And where's your bat?
So but it's about cricket opportunity. Do I need to play in Division 1 because England aren't going to pick you as a batter if you're playing in Division 2? There was a lot of that used to float around in conversations. Is it that you're not in the role you want? Is it that you don't feel that the coaching staff are necessarily going to take your game to the next level? Do you just need a fresh start? Might there be a family influence that, in terms of, you might, as I said earlier, you might have partner and children in a different part of the country, and you want to move home. So what's your priorities? But most of the time, that's the cricket ones. And then you kind of narrow down to what those counties. Probably then got an idea of priority across those 5 or 6 counties in that situation. You'd probably then go and meet them all face to face. So you'd probably go and sit down with them and spend time with them. And in that interim period, while you're setting up meetings, that's probably taking in May, that's probably taking the majority of the month to go and see 5 different teams, go and actually have really constructive conversations about what it would mean if the player moved. You're then starting to put the bones together of what a contract would look like. So how long's the contract? What sort of salary might we be talking about? Those sort of headline details start to get pieced together. And then after those meetings have taken place, you're probably narrowing it down more to, out of 5 or 6, down to 2, probably, realistically, that you're probably taking those negotiations forward in a bit more detail. And you're then giving the player enough space, but giving him enough support, or her. Obviously, these days now, with kind of how our women's game's evolving, this is now starting to be really relevant for our female members. But my previous experience was always sort of male-led. But it would be how that player then needed enough space to make a decision, but how you supported them making that decision. who were the right people to be involved in the conversation. Do they have a mentor? Or family quite important? You bring the right people in, you facilitate that happening. And usually by June, early July, you're landing on a decision as to where you want to play and ironing out the final details of the negotiation and the contract and appearance fees and bonuses and salary increases and all the things that go into a sort of modern day sporting contract. Looking to deal with those finer details before the player signs on the dotted line. And then quite quickly, there's a press release that player X has signed with Middlesex or Surrey or Sussex or whoever else it might be.
At what point in that process are you informing your current county? You mentioned going to meet counties. I guess one of the challenges with the schedule a lot of the time is finding the time to go and have that meeting, but also to do it in a way that, presumably, as with any other job, you could do it while claiming to be sick rather than claiming to be discussing your next move.
Going to the dentist again.
Yeah, it happens. I would say, look, I think that's one of the biggest skills and pieces of value that agents bring into that space, and we've got some really good agents doing this really well, is actually managing the relationships. And it's probably one of the most crucial parts of a process that I just outlined there. Could take 3 months, potentially 2.5, 3 months comfortably. You're being pretty transparent with your current employer. So you're having a conversation with the director of cricket at the county that the player's currently at, because often they're not set they're absolutely leaving. They're often still one of those 6 counties is probably their existing one. In still a lot of cases, not all, but majority of cases, their home county is still a reasonable option. And I'm sure, like we just mentioned Matt Fisher earlier, I'm sure Matt gave pretty good, significant considerations to whether he was going to stay at Yorkshire. I'm sure, I would imagine, and I'd guess it probably wasn't just a simple, I'm leaving, so I'm going to go and talk to everyone else. So as an agent, you're managing that relationship and you're trying to be transparent enough with the director of cricket at the county where the player currently is that they understand what's going on and they don't feel you don't want them to feel like they're finding the information out secondhand. You want it to come from you. So I think that's where agents really do a great job on behalf of players, is managing those relationships effectively, so that each DOC in that 5 or 6 clubs really is clear about what the key factors are for the player, probably where they sit in the pecking order. Am I a good chance of signing the player? Am I maybe less chance of signing the player? Everyone comes out of it at the end feeling like they've been fairly communicated in, they've had a crack, and they don't feel, if you can ring a county up and say, actually, I'm really sorry, but he's going to be going somewhere else, and the DOC doesn't shout down the phone at you, that's usually like you've managed it reasonably well. If they can understand, okay, look, we're disappointed, but we get it, that's a pretty good outcome. And that's definitely what agents do effectively, I think.
But because of that like closed market kind of effect of it being 18 counties, but how often is it a case that you'll be managing a deal or potentially multiple deals, and once one player moves from X to Y, that allows the process for player A to move to B and B to C and so forth? Like, is it as that dramatic a chain as it could be? Sounds like it could be.
Yeah, I'm sure he wouldn't mind, PCHM wouldn't mind me saying it, but James Harris definitely managed to keep the market waiting for the entirety of the 2010-11 season, whatever it was. There was definitely a scenario when James moved it that he had almost the whole of county cricket was really interested in him, and he definitely had a significant. Probably had 10 offers plus on the table. I don't know exactly when it came down to it, but there was also at that point Jack Brooks, Ajmal Shazad, Liam Plunkett, and Chris Jordan, all in the same cycle. So they were all out of contract and they were all looking at moves. And I was working with Chris and Liam at the time, so I kind of had a really good feel for the factors that were playing out. And Yorkshire moved quite quickly to say that they were going to look to sign 2. And they were very clear that Brooksy Jack was the one, and that made sense while they were talking to James. But really, the rest took quite a while, and it probably took best part of 3 months, I would say, for that 3-4 months maybe for that sort of trickle down effect to happen. And it did trickle from one. I probably won't tell you who was in what order because it's probably not fair on those. But which one went from who was 2, who was 3,
who was the least in demand?
Absolutely not. It definitely trickled down, and it did, and it meant what? And actually, the market sort of quite quickly went right. James has made his decision, and the county that was after, I think that's when Adge moved to Notts off the top of my head, but I'm not absolutely 100%. But where Adge went was quite clear. Where Liam's then became very, very obvious, and CJ's became very obvious as well. So but that was really unique. It's very rare that I can't think of another scenario where it's probably as high as that kind of number. So 4 or 5 is probably the max that most deals would be navigating in terms of counties and relationships, because quite quickly as well, you can quite quickly rule out a decent number at some point in time. So that's the part that allows you to, I guess, get rid of a few.
I remember writing about the June 1st date last year, when certainly compared to this year, it was a particularly busy summer, and there was a lot going on, and a lot of deals were sorted early, sort of became loan moves, and a few guys were frozen out, and a few guys carried on as normal. And but June 1st, my understanding is that was a compromise position, right, between April 10th as it was, and I think before then, like September time, when you'd probably say now, certainly that was too late for counties and players to get their house in order for the following year. Like, what I don't know, like, so June 1st when you were allowed to chat, but what challenges does that present? Like, if we're talking about I don't know, like, as it is currently set up for players and for clubs, what are the what are the nuances that you have to navigate from then onwards? I think if we take an example from last year, like Matt Parkinson, I think played his last game for Lancashire on June 2nd and signed for Kent not very long afterwards, and then ended up on loan at both Kent and Durham between then and the end of the season. Obviously in Lancshire's case, I think they had the same situation with Rob Jones. Their view was, right, once you moved elsewhere, we've got to prioritise guys who are going to be here next year. But how easy is it to navigate that position? Because I spoke to players last year, for example, who deliberately delayed announcing their moves, to both publicly and privately, to essentially to prevent that situation. Like, is that an awkward one to manage? Yeah,
it is, and I think the more and more we see scenarios where counties come out and say that we're not going to publicly say we're not going to pick a player because he's moving, I think more and more players will get cautious about making decisions early. The counties would like the 1st of June date to be later because of this disruption, and we've argued strongly that it has to stay at 1st of June, and we really don't see a reason for it to move from that, because fundamentally this is just about their ability, in most cases, to secure their employment beyond the end of October. We're not talking about the average salaries in county cricket, clearly are not enough to let you retire on. So this is people's ability to pay mortgages. It's not about sporting interests and the other parts. It is actually just putting people at the heart of it. So we've stood pretty firm that 1st of June is a reasonable date, but it does create challenges with players when counties don't want to pick them, and also in some cases don't want to loan them out to their new county because that county might be in the same division, might not have budget to spend. So actually I think agents are starting to factor in more and more, okay, well, if we're signing with you, County X, have you also got the ability to take them on loan for the rest of the season? Is that something you're happy to do if we can facilitate it? I think last year felt like a slightly unique and tetchy year. It just felt like it came a bit. I hope it's not one we have to see again. I hope the stance from counties does soften a little bit, that players will carry on doing their job and performing, and if the county really doesn't want to pick them, that they at least allow them out on loan somewhere else to at least be able to continue playing first team cricket. So it does create an unhelpful tension, but in the same breath I wouldn't want to move it any further back, because I don't want that uncertainty for players of saying, well, okay, it's 3 months from the end of your employment before you can actually talk to other people about where you're going to be working outside of professional sport. That just doesn't happen. And we're not talking about much, unlike Harry Kane moving to Bayern Munich, we're definitely not talking however many hundreds of thousands a week. It's definitely a complete polar opposite to that. So you want people. Is that something that could be written into a new CPA, or is that too? I don't know what you'd be writing, but like some kind of understanding around
playing to the end of your contract, being treated as you were pre-deal, or is that a kind of sort of club's prerogative to do as?
Yeah, I had a really constructive conversation with an agent about it last year, who sort of said, well, actually, it should just be written in that players should be able to move on loan once they've signed a deal with a new county. Well, there's something to that effect anyway. And I agreed with the principle of what he was trying to say around welfare and around about making sure that the players weren't stuck playing second team cricket for 3 or 4 months. But there also is a reality that those players might have a job to do for that county for the rest of the season. Lias Deploy still had a job to do for Derby last year. The 3 lads at Worcester still, obviously Josh was in and around the test squad, but Dylan and Jack Haynes still had jobs to do, and actually Worcester needed them. So I don't think there's a one size fits all. I think you just have to try and deal with it at this point in time through healthy collaborative conversation. And I know that sounds a bit idealistic, but it does generally sort of work. You just go through the odd bump of a slightly stronger view in 1 or 2 places. But as a general, if we look back since this, and this was the same challenge previously before the 1st of June date came in, the challenge is not different. It's generally always worked itself out in a reasonably sensible way. So I just think we had a bit of a niggly year, if I'm honest, last year. I hope so anyway.
And on that, in terms of to kind of round out the conversation, do you think it works in its current format? So the newish rule of like players can start talking to counties on June the 1st, the fact that players tend to move at the end of their deals rather than it being a kind of gossip-filled rumour mill transfer market, but not transfer market. Does it, in your opinion, work? And if it doesn't work, what are the parts of it you'd like to see change?
It works because players are moving. There is generally a reasonably healthy movement of players. We're not finding players generally locked into really long contracts that they can't get out of. So in simple terms, it does work. There's definitely been conversations in the variety of working groups that the ECB like to set up with sort of county DOCs, county CEOs of the idea of a transfer window. And I'd be in favour of exploring the idea of saying, okay, for players who are not in the last year of their contract, is there a window where where it would promote discussion? I think it's something that we would definitely not be against. I think there would be absolutely a willingness to explore trying it and see what happened. I think the challenge with it is the reality of moving players through a transfer window is there isn't as we've been alluded to, it's quite a closed market, right? So if a bigger county is going after a player from a smaller county and they're prepared to pay some money to the smaller county to get that player out, is that smaller county going to be able to find a player once to replace them? My sense is we'd probably have a window with 2 or 3 moves in it for the first few years. I'm not saying it wouldn't start to evolve. I think it might do, but I'm not sure it's a really easy. If you lose Harry Kane, you can scour the world to bring in someone to play up front for Spurs, and it's a huge market to be able to look at bringing talent in from. It isn't the same. So if you're prepared to as a DOC, if you're prepared to let that player go in exchange for financial compensation, you also have to know that you don't need the player. That's probably unlikely if it's a player that someone's prepared to pay some money for. And therefore, if you're going to lose a player who might be one of the better ones in your squad, how are you going to replace them? Or how are you going to be able to supplement your squad in a way that you're not going to be worse off? So that's the crux of the challenge, I think, in terms of it. But the principle of trying to do it, I think it's an interesting concept that the game's talked about. And I do think at some point we might bring it in. But what I really think it is just encouraging a forum for discussion, and it's just encouraging a way of making those conversations a little bit more comfortable. Whereas I do think
I was going to say, is it fair to say that I guess the middle ground there is that the Worcestershire trio being a good example last year. Since then, well, no, probably even before then, Pennington had played England under 19s. In fact, all 3 have played England under 19s. Josh Tarr made his Test debut. Jack Haynes has been around the Lions, and that they've received pittance for for the trio, which I guess was not just what they were offering Worcestershire at the time, but also all the work that's gone into them as academy products. Like, is the middle ground that there probably needs to be a slightly better compensation system for clubs signing players at the end of their deals. It as does kind of exist with football's Bosman system, where if you sign, thinking about and saying, if you sign a player at the end of their contract under a certain age, I want to say 24, that there is still a fee to pay that recognises the development into those players. Like, is that the middle ground between having an actual transfer market, transfer window, and having what we've got at the moment, where there is very little that you get as Worcestershire in that situation, other than essentially 3 guys off the wage bill?
Yeah, I mean, there is a compensation system in place. I just don't think it's particularly talked about. And it was one that the counties... So there's always been a compensation system. There's sort of these PRFP payments that is effectively the amount of money you receive for playing England players. I think the scenario was that even Moeen Ali had been at Worcester for 10 years and Warwickshire was still receiving kickbacks on those payments that Worcestershire were receiving for Moeen Ali being on the park. Warwickshire was still receiving income from that. The system changed a little bit at the request of the county chairman, that they wanted a more instantaneous transaction, sort of something that was a bit more, well, you, in simple terms, you've taken my player, so I want some money. Yeah. That exists. Now you can debate,
but should there be? But should it be a higher fee? I guess is what I mean.
Potentially, my concern, if you go down the route of a higher fee, you then start to potentially make player movement restrictive, because the reality of that instantaneous check that you have to write can become prohibitive then to some counties. Cash flow, smaller counties have to operate tighter to the line. Does it allow Surrey to continue to be the ones that can always look to recruit, and actually it's prohibitive for someone else? And also, to a point, you slightly just moving money through the system, because you get money in for one, but you have to pay out for another.
Yeah,
there is debate around all of that. So,
and I guess that would exist if you. I guess the other risk of a transfer market is that as soon as, and this very much happens in football, but as soon as the selling club knows that the buying club has money because they've just received a fee from another club, then you end up paying over the odds for your replacement, because that's something like the big difference in county cricket from football is that it can take a lot of years to put together your squad, because as you say, like there might just not be the player in that restricted market to bring in which case it becomes bring in a couple of overseas players who can do that role for you, 3 or 4 blokes over 14 Champo games, for example. I don't know, you end up with that. I guess that's the other side of this, isn't it? Like the as it currently is, you kind of have to. So it can take a fair few years to get to where you want to, because you can't plan in the same way for having a really good window as you might say in football parlance.
And I think that's actually where the idea of creating a forum for discussion, so a transfer window, where it is pretty comfortable to just ring up your opposite number down the road and say, actually, look, would you entertain the idea of letting player X move if we had the right conversation? Maybe there's a player in exchange and some money, and could we find a way to have that conversation? I don't think that does happen. It does go on, but maybe that would just encourage that behaviour, and that would encourage that kind of idea of it happening a bit more often. So I think that would be an interesting test for a few years to see what impact it had on a potential market.
And I guess the one thing you've not spoken about that taps into that as well is the loan system, which I've always felt could be much better used, like, because it is there. And off the top of my head, the last couple of years, if we say Toby Albert joined Kent for 1 Champion game, I think it was, Sherpa joined Worcestershire for essentially to give an England bowler playing time, and Scott Curry's on loan at Leicestershire for the season. So you've got there on their own 3 different types of loan. And then you've had a lot of like emergency seamers over 1 or 2 games. It's always kind of felt a bit taboo to me. Like when you often I remember speaking. There was a press conference at the start of the season at Kent, I think it was, and Matt Walker and Simon Cook said, in an ideal world, we will not touch the loan market this year. It was kind of a response to what happened to them the year before with a lot of injuries. but it was kind of also saying, I don't know, it felt to me like it was almost saying like if we have to use the loan market, then we failed kind of thing. When I feel like it shouldn't be that. Like teams are playing a lot of games, bowlers are playing a lot of games. You're going to get injuries, but also you could just rotate guys and bring guys in for a couple of games and give more cricketers across the circuit cricket without breaking the guys that you've got full time. Like is that, I don't know, like does the taboo thing ring true with you like that? I feel like the circuit as it is ripe for more expansive use of that market.
I think there's a fear, maybe that's the wrong word, but there is, I'm going to use it anyway. There's a fear amongst counties of if you go off and score runs against us in the same division or take wickets against us, well then you're negatively impacting our chances of success, or we're going to look silly if you go off and score runs for someone else and we're not picking you. I've heard that this week. Well, the idea that a player wouldn't go on loan because if he scores runs for another side, that maybe makes the county look like they don't know what they're doing. So, and I think that definitely is hampering some loan moves. I think I do sometimes look at some of these, can't keep track sometimes of the ones going in and out, because you see a player go in and they're going on 3 weeks, they're going on loan for a month and then they're back after one game.
Jack Brooks did a world tour in his last year, didn't he?
Exactly, he did. And I think you could use the loan market more effectively as a bigger club with a bigger squad to allow someone just to go on loan for a year. And this is definitely much more akin to the football model of let them go on loan for a year and just develop in someone else's environment, know that they're going to play relatively regularly. They might be higher up in the pecking order at that county than they are at your own at that point. But you know that player's got something you really like in the long run. It happens a little bit, but then I think you kind of get this, oh no, but we've had an injury, so we're going to call him back. I kind of wonder in that scenario where that's when you dip back into the loan market and you just accept that player is out of your environment for that 1 year because that's their development. There's definitely more opportunity, I think, in that kind of area. I think, respectfully, to some of the counties with smaller budgets, some of them use the loan market really, really well. But I think there's probably an openness, becoming more openness from the bigger counties to entertain that. But it could definitely be used better. The loan market is working practically, but it's definitely got more capacity to be used.
Works practically, but not creatively, I guess, is where it kind of is at the moment.
I think creatively is a great word for it, actually. I think teams could be more creative with how they view it. Absolutely. I definitely don't have the answers as to what creative looks like, but that idea of letting someone go off and just develop.
It's sort of more examples of like the Curry, like Scott Curry's an event. I can't think of many at all who've done what he's doing this year, just literally playing. You know, it's as you said, it's the football version, isn't it? It's a season-long loan at another club. Go and play for them. Like that doesn't seem to happen.
There's very few of them that you can think of. But I do think, having been involved in sort of director of cricket type conversations, there is more of an appetite. I think it is something that a handful of the bigger counties where they've got bigger squads and they can see a young talented player who's just getting blocked, can't get in, but is doing well in second team cricket. I do think there's much more of an attitude now. No, just go. We'll deal with it. If we have to go into the loan market, we'll do that. But we're probably on the cusp of seeing a few more of those, I think. And Scott's example, having clearly worked, and he's done brilliantly this year, probably suggests that a few might look at that and say, actually, there's something in that. Let's give that a try.
You see, sorry for following the Chelsea model, just buying every player in the country, loading them all out one at a time. But no, Rich, thank you very much for spending your time with us and explaining some of the kind of the minutiae and the details of this world that we don't particularly get to hear much about. Nick, thank you very much for arranging Rich to come on and for being a great brainchild of this. Anyway, nobody covers county cricket like the Cricketer, and you can get access to all of our coverage for all 18 teams for as little as £3.99 a month. The Cricketer have won the ECB's basically best cricket journalism award for the last 6 years running. I've hyped that up a little bit more than what it actually is, but that's fine. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for watching. We'll be back in the same time and the same place next week.